Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Nareen's Life with MS. I am Nareen, and I'm so excited because today is the first episode of my Treatment Tuesdays series. So, I'm pretty much finishing off with my favorite things. I kind of ran out of favorite things, to be perfectly honest, as well, because I found out that there aren't too many favorite things that I can have that are both related to MS and also in some way to um, living life with it or combating it or something like that. So I'll just go into more of the treatment side of things, um, what I did in terms of treatments, and also my story and a little bit of my history through these treatments. So the first one, I want to go all the way back to the early days. So I think it was June or July of 2009 when I was diagnosed, and I think the week after my diagnosis, or when it became um, abundantly clear that I had MS, I got my first relapse, or at least the first relapse that I know was a relapse. It came combined with the flu and everything, so it was like perfect timing. It was kind of like, well, now I think you're asking for it. That was pretty much the way I saw it being. But yeah, so I um, was diagnosed, and then I pretty much started. I mean, I'd say at the first part it was pretty much just recovering from the relapse, which was mostly just steroids, and the steroids continued for, I want to say, a couple of months, because obviously, had the strongest steroids pretty much the week off, which got me back to walking. It pretty much brought my right eye back from near blindness to at least seeing certain things. So there were, a lot of things that ended up happening. Of course, after that, I went on oral steroids, and, it continued for a while. And, I definitely know that because, you know, um, because my shape pretty much went from being relatively average to cylindrical to slightly papaya shaped to pretty much having a muffin top. And I'd say it even go above a muffin top. It practically became like the top of a cupcake because there was just so much of it spilling over the sides. So that was initially what ended up happening in 2009, but I did not begin my first treatment until 2011. So this was when I went to college, and thankfully enough, I went to a college where there was an MS specialist, and the MS specialist, she actually taught at the medical school, as part, at the medical school of my college. Now, the funny thing was that the medical school just ended up having a different campus than the main campus that I was on. So it would take about half an hour to travel there by bus, but thankfully it was fairly easy to get there and back. And that is where the neurologist recommended I start Copaxone. I mean, at that point in time, they were actually thinking that I could try Tysabri, but nobody was very open to the idea of me having to go on a monthly basis back to the hospital to pretty much get an IV, and then staying there for X number of hours and then coming back. um, you know Given all of that, I just said it would be a lot easier if there was something that I could do myself. And Copaxone was easy like that because it was self-injecting, daily injections. So I got really good at just injecting myself. um, of course, since it was subcutaneous, none of those places were in like, the really fun places, but essentially I got to know, what were the easy areas to inject and what were the hard areas to inject. And definitely I would say the hardest parts were my hips, especially considering that I could never tell if the needle actually entered me. And so a lot of times I would feel like, okay, the needle hasn't entered me, and so I'd probably get myself to, you know inject just get myself mentally ready to inject myself again, and I'd pull the needle out a little too early, and there would be just, I'd hold the pen in my hand, and there's just, you know you can see the needle, and you'll see like a stream of medication just like going outside. So that happened maybe 3 or 4 times over the 4 years that I actually was on Copaxone. But Copaxone as a medication, I would say it was probably the easiest one to handle, considering that the only real side effect was, having to be having, certain parts of your body that just had those injection site, reactions, right? Turning hard, turning a little lumpy sometimes. And this happened very often with my arms, um, which was to get, small bruises. So obviously, you know, had a lot of people questioning why my arms were bruised, especially when I would wear, sleeveless t-shirts. And considering it was California, I would wear that quite often. But honestly, I would say Copaxone was, not the hardest medication to have, even though, yes, I was injecting myself every day, throughout the week. So it was the arms, the hips, the thighs, and the stomach. And I even got like a little diary where I could mark, like, okay, I took the injection over here, so that, the following week when I would inject that area again, I would make sure that I did not inject the same place, just so that, it wouldn't become even harder and make it even more difficult to, inject myself there. So that, was sort of what ended up happening. And the thing with Copaxone also was that, you would get the syringes. So you'd get 30 syringes for the month. They would all come in like a nice little box, and you had to keep them refrigerated, but you could keep them outside the fridge for up to 7 days, which was very helpful actually, for up to 2 weeks, I think, or 10 days, which was very helpful because during college I was actually traveling um, at least once a year to, to do some volunteering. And so you can imagine me being in places like Honduras, you can see me in Ghana, you could see me in Panama also. And I still would take, maybe 6 or 7 of these alcohol swabs, and then I'd have my pen and I'd load my injection into my pen, put it up, load it up, and then just put it, close my eyes, and like inject myself. Um, and the closing of my eyes actually stopped. I'd say maybe after the first year, because then I would actually see, if I'm injecting it properly. I'd sometimes go look at a mirror to make sure that, yeah, I mean, there's no, you know, it's not sort of, it's lined up to my arm, it's lined up to my hip, so that there's no you know no bigger no bigger you know um, reaction site. As a result, there's not a very big there's not a very big reaction site. There's not a very big bruise as a result of injecting this way onto like skin that is like this, because that would happen quite often if I didn't actually look into a mirror. So that was one thing that I had to pretty much do. And thankfully, the one thing that it did was it taught me quite a bit of discipline, because the one thing I knew was I needed to have the level of energy. I needed to have the energy to be able to inject myself at the end of the night, because I thought that was probably the best thing to do. Obviously, I was very wrong. I should have taken it early in the morning, because then I would, have the rest of the day to be, you know, as busy as possible. And the last thing, you want to do as a college student is, get back to your dorm room at 2 a.m. at night, sometimes even after, let's say, a party or a late night study session, or even sometimes, taking a break in between an all nighter to just go and inject yourself and then going back out there to study, right? Or party, or any of the other things that you do in college. So that was pretty much Copaxone, and so I carried it on for about 4 years, um, and I'd say the thing that honestly hurt quite a little bit was honestly the cost. I mean, Copaxone was a very expensive medication, and sure, I had really great insurance, but even then, I had quite a bit of copay, and it wasn't until I think my third year in college that I realized that I could even get my copay reduced by talking to certain people who actually to the company that actually made Copaxone. And the only way I learned that was because someone from the company actually called me and they said, do you actually use a copay assistance program? And I had to ask them, what is copay assistance? And then they actually told me that, oh yeah, I mean, we can reduce your payment for 3 months, um, up until you only have to pay maybe about $200 for 3 months. And honestly, the copay I had to pay until then was close to, I'd say, $2,000 to $3,000. So that was a lot more money. Obviously it was my dad's money, but that obviously meant that there was a lot more money in my bank account that I could spend on other things, and actually stretch out and request less money, just because I'm not paying for this copay, as much for copay. So that was my sort of experience with Copaxone, and I'd say it wasn't it was pretty okay, like as a thing, and as a treatment I'd say it was a great starter treatment. um, in terms of efficacy, I mean, I started Copaxone in February of um, 2011, and I think I had my second relapse, or at least my second known relapse, in March of 2011. So clearly, I mean, there are certain things that may need to, I definitely need to think about, probably even meditate on for that. But I would say that Copaxone overall, I'd say it was relatively simple. Now, you know, future treatments did have their own positives and negatives, but I would say it was a good starter treatment just because I did not know how aggressive or how um, you know how my own MS was going to affect me. I mean, I was 2011. I was still February. I was still 18. So I still had a lot of that youthful energy, right, in myself. So I pretty much used all of that, and I definitely relied a lot on, just pretty much my own adrenaline to pretty much get me up, get me out. And of course, I, uh, would not complain about the fact that, I had to take an injection every day, right? It just, at one point in time, I would get tired of it, but I'd say at least at the start, I was like, okay, it's at least some level of discipline for someone who might have needed a lot more discipline than I was practicing in college. So at least there was, that attached to me. So I'd say that was pretty good. Um, Obviously, I missed quite a few injections along the way, right? Especially ones where I would, maybe not wake up in, my own room. Uh, so those were definitely the times when, I had missed a shot. And I think it came down to, I want to say, 60 or maybe 90 over the course of 4 years, which means I missed 15 to 30 shots a year, which is about 2 shots a month, which honestly, if you're taking something on a daily basis, I would definitely have missed more if there was a pill that I had to take on a daily basis. I'm pretty sure I would miss more pills than I would miss injections. So I'd say it was pretty good. Efficacy wise, I'd say it wasn't the strongest, it wasn't the most effective, especially considering that a month after I started taking it, I got another relapse. And and a relapse doesn't mean that I did have to take steroids. I pretty much, actually, I got an IV pole, because I was taking steroids. I actually got an IV pole, and that pole stayed with me all 4 years of my college life, and it definitely took on a lot more things than just being you know a an IV pole. I mean, there were times where it would be a coat rack. There were times where I hung certain, I think, fairy lights on it. I definitely used it to, a lot of different things. I mean, hang bags, hang my, my backpack as well. So, out of using Copaxone, I not only got disciplined, not only got my first treatment, but it just so happens indirectly I also got an IV pole out of it. So, I'd say all in all, not bad as a first time experience, and a first time MS treatment. But I'd say those 4 years were probably also the easiest 4 years to go through, because they were the earliest 4 years. And I definitely had a lot more energy to be able to just keep injecting myself on a daily basis. And I definitely had a lot of energy, so that I could run around, and I felt like, okay, this treatment is definitely helping me out. So that is my story with my first treatment, Copaxone. And I will continue this with other treatments. I mean, I'll go first with the allopathic treatments, then I will go over some of the alternative treatments, and I have taken so many of them. I mean, I've got um, Ayurveda, I've got Chinese medicine, I've got a whole host of different things. I've even done acupuncture, I've done acupressure. I mean, all of those things will have their own day and will have their own story. And I hope that uh, you know you stick around for the ride. And if you do have any questions, if you do have any suggestions, if you do have any comments to add, please add them in the comment section so that we can get this conversation started. So once again, to end off, this is Narain's Life with MS. I am Narain, and I hope you're having a great Tuesday. And with that said, good night, everyone.